What's up, guys? My name is Brandon. Welcome to another week where we're looking at 4 things that God has given all of us and how we can trust Him with those gifts. Today, we're going to talk about your story. So go ahead and post that thing on Instagram and we'll get started. Kidding, not the story we're talking about today, but we are talking about your actual story. God has given each of us a story and we can trust God with our story. To do this, I want to take a look at 2 different people in the Bible. First, I want to open up to the book of Acts and look at my guy named Paul. In Acts 26, we see Paul actually on trial for his faith. And in true Paul fashion, even while he's on trial, he decides to tell the story of how God changed his life. And I love how he starts, man. He starts with talking about how he used to be. Paul actually used to be named Saul, and while he was named Saul, he was a leader of a group who opposed Christians and did horrible things to them. Then Paul talks about how Jesus changed his life and how Saul changed the first letter of his name. Here's what he says in Acts 26, verse 12 through 16. One day I was on such a mission to Damascus, armed with the authority and commission of the leading priests. About noon, Your Majesty, as I was on the road, a light from heaven brighter than the sun shone down on me and my companions. We all fell down, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is useless for you to fight against my will." "Who are you, Lord?" I asked. And the Lord replied, "I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. Now get to your feet, for I have appeared to you to appoint you as my servant and witness. Tell people that you have seen me and tell them what I will show you in the future." So basically, Jesus is telling Paul like, "Yo, Paul, I know you've been playing for the wrong team and you've been my opponent, but now I'm gonna sign you over to my team and you're about to be the star player." Sounds a lot like LeBron coming to the Lakers. Can I get an amen? But Paul goes on to say that since meeting Jesus in this moment, he's living differently. He's following what Jesus said. He stopped persecuting Christians, and now he's making more Christians by introducing people to Jesus. Paul's story is incredible, man, and God used Paul's story to impact so many lives in a positive way. And if Paul trusted God with his story, then we can trust God with our story. Maybe your story has something in common with Paul's story. Maybe you've experienced this radical change in your life or an unbelievable moment with Jesus. Trust God with your story. He can use it. But what if we haven't had like this amazingly bonkers story where like the skies part and the light brighter than the sun shines in our face and we hear like the audible voice of Jesus like he's all up in our AirPods? Well, you're not alone. I want you to hear somebody else's story, so flip back a few pages to John chapter 4, verse 16 through 18. This is a simple story of a woman who was getting water from the same well as Jesus. It was just the 2 of them, and they began to talk about the Messiah, who is Jesus, but she didn't even recognize that she was talking with him. Check out this interaction. "Go and get your husband," Jesus told her. "I don't have a husband," the woman replied. Jesus said, "You're right. You don't have a husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth." This is a slightly different story, right? You've got a woman who doesn't even recognize that she's talking to the Messiah and who has lived a life that she's probably not really proud of. And yet, Jesus still shows her love and still has this long conversation with her. Jesus went on to tell this woman that he was the Messiah, and do you know what she did? She went back into the village that she came from and told everyone how Jesus is now a part of her story. The whole village came out to see Jesus, and many of them believed in Jesus that day because of what the woman said. And I believe that this happened because the woman realized what I think we need to realize. And that is every story involving Jesus is worth sharing. So maybe you can relate to this woman's story. Or maybe you can relate to Paul and this woman at the well's story in the fact that you're still in the part of your story where you haven't met Jesus yet. And now you can see how he's changed their lives, and you want to invite Jesus to do the same thing in the story of your life. You can do that today simply by saying that, "God, man, I've tried to write my own story and it just hasn't worked out. So God, I'm handing over the pen and I'm trusting you to write my story, because I believe what you did for Paul and what you did for this woman at the well, you can do the same thing for me." And what I hope we can learn from these 2 stories is that we can trust God with our story. God can use any story if we trust him with it. That's because any story where Jesus is the main character is worth telling. So that leaves us with a question. What is your story? And man, Collide, if I'm honest with you, sometimes I feel like I fall in between this crazy radical story like Paul and this simple story like the woman at the well. And I can so easily go back and forth thinking one day my story is gonna be so good, it's gonna help so many people and it's gonna change the world. And then the very next day I can feel like, man, my story's just not good enough. Or my story's not as good as his story or her story. And maybe you feel the same way. But here's the truth. No matter what your story looks like, if Jesus is a part of your story, then it's worth sharing. So let's trust God with our story and let's see what he can do with it. Love you, Collide. Peace.